So in this lesson, we're going to focus on building a simple walk cycle. We're going to build a walking loop. We're going to approach it from a couple of different directions. And the first step in the process is simply going to be to build the model. And I want to get the model built, or at least parts of the model built, before we start talking about some of the concepts of the walk cycle, because the rigging or the relationship in which we build the model is going to be very important. Now, the model itself that we're going to use to demonstrate the walk cycle is going to be very simple, and then you can take these concepts and apply them to a more sophisticated model, but I do want to focus on just the mechanics of motion here. So in order to get started, I'm going to go to my class folder, and I'm going to create a new project folder, and I'll just call this walk. I'll go into Cinema 4D and launch my first project, and I always like to before I even start creating anything, I like to do a file save as. I'll go find my external drive, my class folder, and I'll find my project folder, and I'll call this walk01. I always like to establish the file before I start saving anything, because Cinema 4D can be very folder dependent. It can be very location dependent in terms of some of the resources that we start to use. Now, for this project, what I want to do, I'm going to start off by building a simple leg, okay? And I'll start off actually with a foot, and everything is going to be based on, scratch that, let me back up just for a second. I am going to start with the leg. Everything's going to be based on a cube. And I'm going to take the cube, and I'm going to build this as if it were the upper leg or lower leg, kind of the bone structure for my little walker here. And so I'm going to start off just by keying in a few values. I'm going to go to 20 along the X. I'm going to keep Y at 200, and I'll type in 20 along the Z. And that'll give me part of maybe the lower leg. This will be the lower leg. The next piece that I make will be the upper leg. I'm going to leave it named cube just for now. And I'm going to Command C to copy and Command V to paste. And I'll just move the second part just up just a little bit. Now, I'm not too concerned about proportion. At this point, I can go back, and I'm going to probably do this a few times over. And I might want to correct a few things for the proportion. But right now, I just want to get these two cubes in place. Now, this is going to be a concept for the lower leg. And I'm going to drop a foot on this object as well, just to have a little bit more reference. And I could copy and paste the cube that I'm using right now, or I could just create a new cube. And I'll just eyeball this. I'll kind of flatten it down this way and that way. And so I'm not really even paying attention to what the values are, but I'm just kind of get this more or less where I think a foot should go. So there's my basic leg. Okay, really, really simple. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back through and name my objects in my object manager in an appropriate way. So I'm going to select this cube, and I'm going to call this lower leg. I'm going to call this next cube upper leg. And I'll call this last cube foot. Now I'm going to arrange this hierarchically. Now before I do that, I'm just going to order these things in a slightly different way. So I have upper leg on the top. I have lower leg on the bottom, so I'll move my foot all the way down to the bottom. So I'm just clicking and dragging in the object manager and dropping that down underneath the lower leg. Now, I want to make sure that I didn't actually nest the foot object yet inside the lower leg. It's actually at the same hierarchical level here, and that's very important for now. We'll actually nest these things together in a very different way here shortly. But before I do that, I want to talk to you a little bit about the relationship of these objects to one another. Now, if you remember back in the 3D design class, we built a lamp, and we built a little Luxo lamp, and we talked a little bit about grouping objects in a very particular way to build a hierarchy, a parent-child relationship in the object manager. Now, in order to demonstrate this point, I'm actually going to save what I'm working on. I'm going to create a new document, and I'll just take pretty much the exact same rig that I have minus the foot. So I'll take a lower leg. I'll copy and paste. I'll move this, copy, paste. I'll move this up a bit, and I'll call this upper leg. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change this object from a parametric primitive to a polygon object. And the reason I'm going to do this is because when I rotate these legs, I want to control the legs and the animation of the leg based on a rotation. It's the same thing I'm going to do with the arms. The arms and legs are going to be very similar. Right now, if I go to the rotation tool and I rotate this object, right now it's rotating around its center, its own center. And I want this to rotate more where the joint should be. So if I grab the lower leg and I rotate my lower leg, there's kind of a breakdown in the fundamentals of the way that the mechanics here work. And so what I want to do is I really want this pivot point to be right about where the knee is, so that when I rotate this object, it's rotating around the knee joint rather than the center of the object. And there's a couple different ways to move the pivot point. The best way to do it in this circumstance, and really the only way to do it when it's a parametric primitive, is to make the object editable. Okay? Now, and I'll demonstrate this point a couple of times. If I take the lower leg and I make it editable, so I turn it into a polygon object by clicking on this icon in the top left-hand corner, or I could tap the C key on the keyboard. Once I make it editable, I can see that the lower leg is no longer a parametric primitive. I can no longer control its X width. I can no longer correct or change the parameters which govern its size based on X, Y, Z. If I take this lower leg, and over here on the left side, we've always been using the model mode of the tool at this point. Just beneath that is the Use Axis tool. If I click on the Use Axis tool, and I only want to do this just for a moment, temporarily, what I can do is I can move the axis independent of the object. Okay? And now I'll go back to Use Model. Now, I've just moved the axis of that object. Now, there were a couple conditions that needed to be true. We cannot do this with a parametric primitive. If I go to the upper leg and I try to go to Use Axis tool and I try to move the axis, you can see that the whole object moves. A parametric primitive, you cannot detach its axis from the object. The minute I make it a polygon or edit it to make that object editable, I can move the axis. Okay, and now once I do, I'm going to go back to the Use Model tool, and the model allows the axis and the object to move together. So now if I go to rotation and I rotate that lower leg, it's bending as if it were at a knee joint. Okay, so I'm going to go to the upper leg. I've already converted that and made that object editable. I'm going to go to the Axis tool, make sure that I'm on the Move tool, and I'll move that up to roughly where I think that the hip joint should be. And when I'm doing this, I got to make sure that I go back to Use Model tool, because if I don't, if I leave it on the axis mode, not only can I move the axis, I can also rotate the axis. So if you start rotating and you don't see your model moving at all, chances are that you left the Use Axis tool selected, and you should always go back to the Use Model tool. Okay, so I wanted to demonstrate this in its own document, and I'd encourage you just to get started and play around with that concept of editing the axis and getting it to move before you move on to the next presentation.